Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro live streaming on A Mighty Blaze on our Facebook and YouTube channels. As always, at Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we have a fabulous interview today with the man who wrote this book and also this book and many other books besides. It is going to be a fascinating conversation. We're going to go deep on this new book called A Stranger in the Lifeboat. And it's such an honor to have Mitch Albom on the show today. He's one of my real writing heroes. And I just think his body of work is sort of unlike any other in American literature. So what a treat today. A few words before we get started. The Thoughtful Bro, as I said, is here every Tuesday at 2 to talk about what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. We broadcast on A Mighty Blaze. A Mighty Blaze was founded during COVID to help writers reach readers when we can't do real life book tours. We're not asking for money at A Mighty Blaze. If you want to support us, just give us a like on social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and get a schedule of author interviews that we do every Sunday. We do 6 or 7 new author interviews every week with people who are launching their books on their pub day. We're so honored actually to have Mitch here on his very pub day. We also have a Mighty Blaze podcast in its 3rd season. You can find that wherever podcasts are downloaded. If you are in fact in the mood to spend some money, please spend it on fabulous books like this. The Stranger in the Lifeboat by Mitch Albom, books that kind of probe what we're doing on this earth, the meaning of life, and what's on the other side of death. It's a fascinating, compelling, timeless book. So please go ahead and buy 1 copy or 10. And now on to our guest. Mitch Albom is the internationally renowned and best-selling author, journalist, screenwriter, playwright, radio and television broadcaster, and musician. His books have collectively sold more than 40 million copies worldwide. He's been published in 49 territories and 47 languages around the world. His books have also been made into Emmy Award-winning and critically acclaimed television movies. Among his many journalistic and humanitarian accolades, Albom was named Best Sports Columnist in the Nation, a record 13 times by the Associated Press sports editors, and he won Best Feature Writing honors for the same organization 7 times. He has founded 9 charities in the metropolitan Detroit area. He operates an orphanage in Haiti where he spends time every month. As for his books, Time Magazine called Mitch Albom the Babe Ruth of popular literature, which I thought was great. His 1997 memoir, Tuesdays with Morrie, stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 years. It became the best-selling memoir of all time. Following Tuesdays with Morrie, he wrote The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, which was the best-selling U.S. hardcover debut of any adult novel ever. His latest book, called The Stranger in the Lifeboat, is about an odyssey on the open seas of 10 castaways who are visited by a strange man who crawls into their lifeboat and claims to be God himself. The story probes all of what Mitch Albom is known for, what our purpose is on earth, what solace we can have in the face of death, and all the things that make a classic Mitch Albom bestseller. So happy to have you here, Mitch. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thanks, Mark. I'm kind of embarrassed by that long introduction, but thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
I actually edited it on the fly. It was longer than that.
You could have edited it a little more, actually. You could have. About hi, Mitch. That would have been good.
Mitch, you're a humble guy, but you've led an absolutely incredible life. And there was so much stuff I found out about you researching this interview that I didn't know. But anyway, I want to talk about the book. I'm very tempted to talk to you about things like what's going on with Kansas City Chiefs, or are the Lakers too old, and things like this that you and I would be interesting to you and me. But this is more of a literary show, so I do want to talk about the book. I think the setup, I'm going to talk about the setup a little bit more later, but it's a kind of classic setup. You have, there's this, all the highfalutin people in the world, this kind of Davos on the sea conference of people who are on a big yacht. And then there's a mysterious accident, and basically everybody, former presidents, CEOs, people like that, they all die, except for a few people who escape in a life raft. So that's sort of the setup. And just tell us what happens next.
They're in the life raft, about 10 people total. Half of them are the rich guests, including the guy who owned the yacht that exploded. And half of them are deckhands and cooks and hairstylists and the like. And after 3 days, nobody's coming looking for them. There's no helicopters. There's no airplanes. There's no anything. They're running low on food and water. There's sharks in the water. And they're desperate, and they're all on their own way crying out for help. And suddenly they see this body floating in the water, which they presume is somebody, again, from the boat. And they pull the body into the into the life raft. It's a nondescript, average looking young guy, nothing special about him. And they pepper him with questions, no answer, no response. And finally, one of the guests says, "Well, thank the Lord we found you." And he says, "I am the Lord." And that's the moment where the trailer ends and the movie begins, so to speak.
Right.
And from that point, they do what people would do in a case like that. No, you're not, or if you're the Lord, what are you doing here? And he says, "Well, haven't you been calling me?" And they say, "Well, wait a minute. So you're going to save us?" And he said, "Well, I can only save you if everyone in this boat believes I am who I say I am at the same time." So he throws down this challenge. And of course, a number of them are not really people who would believe even under the best of circumstances, let alone a guy who doesn't look like you think God would look like. And he eats, he gets hungry, he gets thirsty, he falls asleep a lot. He hardly acts regal or divine in any way. He doesn't look like Gandalf or, and so they let their eyes and their perceptions kind of do the thinking for them, and they doubt him. And some dismiss him as just a joke. But strange things keep happening as the days go by. And as they get more and more desperate, you see some of their attitudes change. Some of them don't. Some get angry at him. He's like, stop playing around with us. If you're God, save us already. And, it was a parable of sorts of really, Mark, to deal with help, like the theme of when we ask for help in our lives, which, of course, over the last few years, a lot of people have been doing in one way or another. You ask for it from other people. You ask for it from your community. You ask for it from the universe. You ask for it from God, depending on, how you're oriented. And we all kind of expect the help to come when we ask for it, as if we're making an order in a restaurant. Like, I'll have the steak. And then if the steak doesn't get here in 20 minutes, they're like, what's taking so long? Well, my observation is that help from the universe or from God or whatever you believe, it comes, it always comes, but it doesn't come when you expect it, and it doesn't always come in the form that you expect. But when you look back on your life 10 years later and you look at that event that you were asking for help from, and you remember that you didn't get it the way you wanted it, but then you see, well, but you know what? If that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. And if this wouldn't have happened, then this wouldn't happen. And I guess in a certain way, that was the best thing that could have happened. And voila, your prayers were actually answered, but it took you 10 years to realize it. And I think that that's something that happens to a lot of people in life. And so that became the underpinning of the book.
Right. There's so much to dig into. I want to talk about how you came up with the character of the Lord and the way you presented him, and like some of the things that happened on the boat, for sure. But I want to start actually with something which is a departure, it seems, for you with this work, which is the thriller elements of the book. And I have to say, I was quite taken by the thriller elements of the book. And I was hoodwinked several times. And I'm so tempted. I'm so excited about the thriller elements of the book that I want to share them, but I'm not going to do it for the sake of not disclosing any spoilers. But suffice it to say, I was misdirected at least 3 solid times when I was sort of shouting at the book, like, what? And so I guess I wanted to ask you, I don't feel like it's a question you get asked, because rightfully so, people ask you so much about, the spiritual aspects of your book, which are so known for, but this is something different. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And I think it probably is the biggest thriller, if you can associate the word thriller with me, that I write. But, I'm no different than anybody else. I like entertaining stories. And Tuesdays with Morrie, which, is the first thing and probably the thing I'm best known for. Obviously, there's not a lot of action in there. It's 2 people sitting, as the one man is dying and he's teaching what life was about. When I wrote The 5 People We Meet in Heaven, which was my first novel, I set out to say, okay, well, I want to talk about some certain lessons and things like that. But, I can't do Tuesdays with Morrie again. I can't have 2 people sitting around. I've got to create a story. And in that case, I created a pretty fantastical story about when you die. What happens is you meet 5 people from your life, but some of whom could have been strangers, and you only spent 30 seconds with them on earth, but you changed their life forever and they changed yours. And one was a soldier and one was, a woman from the early 1900s. And so I started to create all these different scenes, and that kind of birthed me in the idea of, you can make a story as exciting as you want and still have it be something uplifting or hopeful at the end, you don't have to get lost in plot. Plot can serve you. And so in this case, I wanted something to be desperate because I wanted the question of help to be, there couldn't be, these people weren't asking for help like, hey, I'd like to move to a slightly larger house if I could pay the rent, help me, universe, get that. Because nobody's going to care. Stakes aren't very high, right? But when suddenly there's sharks around you, or there's tidal waves and the boat is being splashed back and forth and you're hanging on for dear life, or it tips over, these are all things that people say, oh my God, how would I ever, to see the word I just used, oh my God, how would I survive in that? I wanted to create that kind of desperation so that the question of, are you going to accept this help now? You're about to starve to death. You're about to be eaten by a shark. You're about to be, tossed into the ocean and left to drown. Are you going to believe somebody is there to help you or not? So the more desperate and more thriller it became, the more the aspect of book that was the underpinning of it became in focus, if you know what I mean. And that's why I did it.
Totally. And you have multiple kind of point of view narrators, you have an unreliable narrator. Oh, it's great stuff. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, I know that you have said, when people have asked you about how you conceive of a work, how do novel ideas come to you? You have said that you often have a message or an idea that you want to get across. I just wonder, like, what was the first thing that came to you about this book? Because one thing I just want to observe is, like, how timeless and how classic this idea of people kind of stranded in a boat, stranded on an island, a group of strangers stranded together, how powerful and kind of eternal a metaphor that is. And I just wonder, is that sort of the image that came to you first, or that hooked you on this as a book idea?
Well, you're right in saying that, and I guess I've said it enough times in stories and interviews, I guess you've read it or heard it, that unlike a lot of authors who say, well, I got this great idea about a guy who's going to blow up a shopping mall, and he's involved with a cartel, and the cartel is actually, the leader of the cartel is married to the president of the United States, which is great. I mean, actually, that's not a bad book. I should write that down, but it wouldn't be one that I would write. So I don't think like that. I tend to think like, okay, I want to write a book about, how desperate we feel after we lose somebody, and if we just could have one more day back with them. That's a universal feeling. And from that, I created For One More Day, which ended up being a story about a guy who decides to commit suicide, and he goes back to his hometown to do it. And he walks into his old house, which has been boarded up and everything. And his mother is in the kitchen making him breakfast, even though she's been dead for 20 or 30 years. And but I didn't think of that first. I thought about, I wanted to do, and he gets to spend one more day with her. But I thought about, I want to do that universal feeling of when somebody's gone and you just want one more day. With the 5 people you meet in heaven, the idea was, I want to write about people who think they don't matter in life, because I believe everybody matters in life. Everybody touches somebody. Everybody has some effect on somebody. But there's so many people you meet who go, oh, my life is so insignificant. And they die unhappily because of that. So then I created the whole world about the 5 people you meet in heaven. So for The Stranger in the Lifeboat, I wanted to write about help and healing. I had gone through something pretty bad, at least for us. We adopted a little girl from Haiti. I have an orphanage that I operate in Haiti. I think you mentioned in the introduction, and I'm there every month, and I've been there for 12 years. And amongst the 53 kids that we had was a little girl named Chica, who at 5 years old developed a brain tumor, and we brought her to America thinking that she'll get operated on. We'll take her back, and she never went home. She became our daughter, and for 2 years we were a family. And it was my wife, me, and our little girl, and we traveled around the world trying to find a cure for her. In the end, she died from this thing, which they told us would take her in 4 months. She lived 2 years, so she was a miracle in and of itself. But I wrote a book called Finding Chica, which was dedicated to her, and I think personally it's the best book I've ever written. And I know it was the most painful book I ever wrote. And I wrote that book out of a lot of pain, even though I think it's got a positive message in the end about making a family. But this book was the one that followed that. And enough years have passed, it's been 4 years plus now, that I have a bit of a different take on the anger that I had when she died, and how I railed at the universe and railed at whatever God might be, and said, you can't be real and kind and benevolent if you can't be real and kind and benevolent to a 7-year-old girl. It'd be one thing with me, but she was born 3 days before the earthquake and survived the earthquake of 2010. Then her mother died 2 years later, giving birth to a baby brother because there was no doctor present. She didn't have to die, but she did. And she became an orphan. And then you give her a brain tumor at age 5 and she dies from it at age 7. Why? What did she do wrong? So a lot of that anger, now that 4 years have passed, I'm able to look at it and say, well, the question isn't so much, why did you take her? Maybe the question is, why did you give her to us? What did we do to deserve that amazing, amazing, loving 2 years with her as our little girl? And there's a character in the book, the inspector, who finds the life raft a year later. So that, as you said, the story's told in 3 different time periods. And a year after the explosion, he finds the raft, but it's empty and there's nothing in it. There's no people, there's no anything, but he finds a notebook inside of it. And he takes the notebook and keeps it for himself, even though all the media start descending on the island and they all, oh, we found a life raft. That means there must be survivors. But he's got this notebook and he's reading the notebook of the account of the 10 people and this God character. And he's a broken guy himself because he lost his daughter just like I did. And if you know anything about me, then he's sort of a surrogate for me. And he's angry and bitter and has no belief in anything. And slowly, through reading this notebook and the account of this God character on a life raft, he starts to come to soften up and start to look at his own life a little differently. And that's sort of what I did. And that's why I chose this book now and how I sort of came to it.
Yeah, Mitch, I do feel that when I read your work that I can feel you working through the issues that you've had in your own life. And it feels like these books spring from a place of, when you had doubt and difficulty with your own relationship with God, and then it is resolving into this work. That's why I found the character of God as he's presented in this life raft so interesting. I mean, I think the story is sort of like of a tradition of kind of beguiling God figures. I mean, the God of Abraham in the Old Testament, of Job, even, the way Jesus appeared in the Gospels. It's like the answers you get are sort of, they're sly, they're witty, they're sort of incomplete, they're mysterious, cryptic, and you sort of get some of what you want, but not all of it. I just wanted to ask you about sort of creating God as a character and kind of why you made him kind of talk the way he did and so on.
Yeah, well, you really nailed it in terms of, even some of your source material, the God of the Old Testament can be very violent and very short-tempered. And the Jesus, not everything he said was linear, know, and many other godlike figures, if you study religion. And you're right, it's always kind of a little sly, a little cryptic. But then I thought, well, it should be that way, because if God talks just like we do, it makes perfect sense, just like, then where's the separation between us and God? So, and I joke around about this. I have to say, like when you write a book where you create, and by the way, those of you who are watching or listening along, I'm not saying, and Mark's not saying, that this guy is God. We just say he says he's God. You have to read the book, and then you'll figure out whether, because there's a lot of other things happen that we can't tell you, but don't go assume, well, he's the guy's God, so therefore it is. So that the mystery element had to be there, but you always worry a little bit when you're like writing a book and you're putting words in God's mouth. You're like, okay, I'm gonna. Says, all right, right? They're like, nothing, lightning bolt's not going to come down and blow up my computer, right? And there are some moments where, like, for example, the owner of the boat is this very haughty, multi-billionaire hedge fund guy who just can't accept the fact that people aren't coming to save him because he's so rich. At one point, when they're all sitting around desperate and hungry and they're just staring at each other, he goes, you know how much money I made last year? Like, and everybody's like, what?
That line.
I mean, that's what he wants to talk about. $8 billion. I did $8 billion last year. And they're all like, who gives a crap? And he says, well, that's what's going to save me. They're going to come for me. And so he gets, when God is sort of talking to some of the other passengers, he says, all right, enough with this stuff. If you're really God, tell me what happened to my yacht. And God says to him, well, why are you so upset about that? He says, because they destroyed my damn boat. And God says, well, you're in another one now. And he says, yeah, but you know, it's not mine. It's not. And God says, that's right. This one is floating. It's kind of like, you know, and one of the passengers laughs and he goes, stop laughing. It's not funny. But you know, those kind of little exchanges, you would think like, well, God's got to be smarter than all of us. Everything we say is just kind of almost like child talk to him. And every now and then he might just let a little one out like, you know, yeah, that's right. This boat is actually afloat, unlike yours. And so there are moments like that where he's funny, but there are moments where he gets hungry, where he you know, where he gets a little angry, where he refuses to do certain things. There's a moment where they're desperate for water and they're begging him for water and he just goes to sleep. And, you know, and I mean, I did that deliberately because that's how we are when we ask for help from the universe or from God or from the divine. It's like, please, please, please. It rarely, like, you know, fills up your hands. Like I said earlier, it takes time. And so he went to sleep. We can perceive that like God's sleeping and not hearing us. Yet while he's sleeping, it starts to rain. And, you know, did this come from him or did he just fall asleep during a rainstorm? And they go outside with their cups and they start filling up their anything they can to try to get fresh water to drink. And then all of a sudden it stops. And they get angry that it stops. And they say to him, who is he woken up now, keep it going. And he says, oh, so you think I did that? You know, like when you need God to do something for you, then you blame him or you and when you don't, you think it's just your own good fortune. You know, you think it's your doing. And so at that point they say, well, whatever it is, just keep it going. He goes, no. And you don't know if he's saying no because he's mad or no because he's stubborn or no because he knows something else about it. And I think that's the way we kind of are with God. You know, we sometimes don't like the answers that we get.
Yeah, and what's really moving about your relationship with God, or at least the way it comes through in your work, is just sort of like this never-ending engagement with this mystery and the kind of where is God in my life and where is God not, and just kind of a persistent questioning and sort of never giving up with this questioning and exploration, which seems to me like kind of the real bedrock of great faith when you see it in people. I wanted to ask you a little bit, this is sort of a writer nerdy question, but you know, just give me a minute to set this question up because I think it'll be worth it. So J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, he's sort of the father of the fantasy genre and literature. He wrote this essay called On Fairy Stories in 1947. And the point that he made with this essay, which is so influential in magical realism and fantasy literature, is grown-ups need fairy tales too. Not only that, but grown-ups need fairy tales with happy endings. He had this term for it called a eucatastrophe, like a good catastrophe. And he thought the story of Jesus in history is sort of the eucatastrophe, happy ending of history. But you know, lots of these other fables in the Old Testament and myths do have these kinds of magical happy endings. And you know, I was thinking about that, and that essay has always been persuasive for me. I love fairy tales and myths, and your work is in this realm. And I think like when I look at the incredible success and the success you've had, unlike kind of almost any other author, and I put that together with the kinds of stories that you tell with these like fables that do have these uplifting endings, I'm just wondering, I guess the question to you then is, why do you think those kinds of stories are so successful? Why do you like telling those kinds of stories?
Because I think hope is a highly undervalued ingredient in our lives. I think particularly in America, we have somehow, and I can't, you know, take a smarter person than me to follow why this has become the case, but we've become more attracted to stories of bad people, broken people, irredeemable people. We're perfectly fine with stories that end where everybody's dead and there's no moral to it. And we're perfectly fine with Succession which I watch, by the way, but you can't root for anybody in that TV series. They're all creeps, or Billions or any of these shows. And I like these shows, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I watch them, but there's a lot of that, and The Sopranos, and we like the anti-hero, and we like the negative result, and we like angst, and certainly when it comes to reviews and what we consider high art, happy endings just aren't part of what happens for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, it's almost considered not real, not serious, not literary or cinematic or whatever, if it wraps up in some kind of hopeful way. I, for whatever reason, just choose to tell stories of hope, I guess because I've had enough tragedy in my life. I've lost a lot of people that I care about and seen a lot of really bad things. I operate in Haiti every single month, where you take your life in your own hands just to go from the airport to the orphanage. And I live in Detroit. I don't need any more serious, I don't need any more bad. When I escape, I like to escape to things that are ultimately positive. And I don't count that as bad. I don't look at that as unserious. I think in the end, we're all searching for hope. And I know because I've seen the end with a lot of people. I guess Tuesdays with Morrie, that experience, forget the book, the experience of sitting and watching a man die week after week and seeing what was important to him and what wasn't, never left me. And he's not the first person I've watched die. And I see a universality to it. And at the end, they're not talking about angst. They're not talking about irony, and they're not talking about, bitterness or how bad things were. They're trying to hold people's hands and tell one another that they love them and that they're going to miss them and how much they appreciate them. And usually with an apology, like I should have spent more time with you. I should have been kinder. I should have been nice. And if that's what awaits us at the end, then I believe that it's inside of us to await us each day, and so I want to write with that kind of feeling. I want to write with something that if it was the last book that you read the day before you died, you would feel that it had given you something good to leave on. And you say, yeah, that's what life is. And I search for that, and it may be more serious than people give me credit for. I'm not avoiding seriousness. I'm actually taking it on full steam.
Yeah, I mean, and so I just want to ask one follow-up question there. I'm just kind of curious why that is. I mean, certainly all writers out there want to be as widely read as you are. All people want an audience. And yet the trend very much certainly is in what one might call literary fiction or more highbrow artistic fiction towards these darker themes. And yet here you are succeeding and with an audience of millions. And it just makes me think, wouldn't everybody try to do that if they could? Which leads me to conclude, there must be something special about you. Do you feel like there's something kind of unique or special about your own character, which kind of allows you to write books like this, or what is it?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. And I don't think I'm unique in any way. I think what I just said, I'm guessing that there were a lot of people who nodded their head and said, yeah, that's right. So I don't know myself why people run away from it. I guess I've not ever been afraid of I don't live for critical praise. I came out of the newspaper world, so I know what newspaper and literary critics, they were friends of mine. And, and I don't, if I've had people say, well, your work is too sentimental. And I go, what's the matter with that? Everybody I know takes out their wallet. They're not showing you their irony card. They're taking out pictures of their kids. And they say, these are my grandkids. Look, aren't they cute? Oh, my grandkids. Or when a song comes on the radio and I go, oh, that was the first slow dance I danced to in high school. Oh, I love this song, whatever. That's sentimental. The most beautiful moments in life are sentimental and full of sentiment. But some people don't want to be labeled that. Like they think that well, there goes my career, and I guess I've never really concerned myself with that. I'm rewarded by the people who read me and the kind of response that I get from people who read me. It isn't like, when's your next book? I like that character. When's the next one? When's the next adventure? I can't wait. They're deep, meaningful responses. They're like, here's how that book changed my life. I was having a problem with my brother and I wasn't talking to him. And then after I read this line, or I was struggling with my own faith in the universe, or, I lost someone and I just couldn't get over it. These are really meaningful things to me. And when you realize you can have that kind of effect on readers, I think you're less worried about what effect you're going to have on your reputation, if you get what I mean. And maybe people are more concerned about that, but there's plenty of room in the writing universe for hopeful stories. And let's not pretend I'm the only person who does it. There are plenty of authors who do it, and there are plenty of movies, that do it otherwise. I just saw that movie Coda, which I was bawling my eyes out at the end of it, and I thought, what a beautiful piece of work. And then I found out like they've been trying to make that for 10 years, and they couldn't get it done. I said, that's typical, like if the woman had been stabbed and was a serial killer, probably would have got made in 6 months, but sometimes you have to fight to tell an uplifting story.
Well, I want to talk about Tuesdays with Morrie for a moment before we get to audience questions. There's a bunch of audience questions and we'll get to them in about 5 minutes. But first, I just want to say, just to wrap up that last topic, I've listened to you, in front of audiences, and I've seen reader feedback on your work online. And the word that keeps coming up is comfort. I think people feel when they read your work, they feel comforted. And I think it's in short supply. And what a great thing to offer people. But, one dovetailing on that last comment you made about if there was a murderer or whatever, it would have been made in 6 months. Like, one of my favorite stories about Tuesdays with Morrie, there's so many remarkable things about that book, the best-selling memoir of all time. I dove into it again. I've read that book so many times, but I dove into it again like this morning, and then like the time just flew. I lost track of time trying to prep for this interview because I got sucked in again. There's something so magnetic and magical about that book. But I think one of the stories I love about it is the way no one would publish it and the reason why you kept going. Could you just tell that story about the journey to publication and why you didn't give up? I just love it.
Sure. Well, it wasn't like I went to visit my old professor to write a book. I went because I felt guilty that he and I had been so close to one another back in college. And then now I found out he was dying from Lou Gehrig's disease. And I hadn't even contacted him in 16 years because I was so ambitious. I was trying to make money and succeed in sports and everything. So I started going to visit him and I got sucked in, I really started to turn around on those Tuesdays because I felt like I was a student again. Here I was, it was right at the right time in my life. I was 37. So I had been out long enough that I had become an adult, but I was still young enough to remember how I felt in college. And every time I sat next to Morrie, I was like a kid again in one of those little desks with the thing, the desk in front of you. And I liked myself better when I was with him. And at one point he said, I'm going to die twice. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, I'm going to die when I die. And then I'm going to die because of the debt that I have. I can't pay my bills. I've been dying for 2-3 years like this. We don't have the money to pay for all the therapists and everything. So my family are going to have to sell the house after I die. And I'm going to die twice knowing that I'm ruining them. So that's when I got the idea to write a book. And I didn't tell him, but I went around to the publishers in New York, and I had 2 very successful sports books up to that point. That was my whole, literary career, but they were bestsellers. And I couldn't get anybody interested in Tuesdays with Morrie. They just said, it's boring. Write another sports book. You're a sports writer. What do you know about that? One guy actually said, you don't know what a memoir is. Come back in 20 years. Maybe you'll understand what a memoir is. He literally said that to me. And I would have given up on it, honestly, Mark. I mean, you get that much rejection, especially a comment like that, and you figure, all right, I'm barking up the wrong tree. Let's drop this idea and try another one in 6 months. But because it was for him, I couldn't do that because I wanted to help him pay his medical bill. So finally, I found a publisher a few weeks before he died, and we were able to. I just wanted enough money to pay his bills, and we were able to get that, and they gave it to us up front. And I was able to go to Morrie and say, listen, I got a publisher for these conversations we've been having. He wanted me to do a thesis, and I couldn't break his heart by telling him I'm not enrolled in college anywhere. I really don't know where I would do a thesis. But I said, hey, we're going to do a book. And I have a publisher. He said, oh, really? Who? I said, Doubleday. He said, ooh, I heard of them. I said, well, not only that, but they're going to give us some money. And, I want you to take all the money and pay your medical bills. And so you don't have to die twice. And I always say that for me, that was kind of the end of Tuesdays with Morrie for me, because I had finally learned the lesson of doing something for somebody else, not asking something in return or for my career or anything like that. And he had that effect on me. But of course, when he died a few weeks later, and he never got to read a page of Tuesdays with Morrie. And so that's what's so ironic about it, is that people are still reading that book all over the world. They're teaching it in classrooms in Japan and Sweden and Australia and in more places I could possibly count. And he's not even here to teach it. And so everybody has that thing inside them. And I guess that's something that I put into every one of my books, that we all have the ability to change the world by changing one person, by touching one other person. And you never know where the ripples of your stone in the pond are going to go. Morrie didn't know. If he came back to Earth for a couple of minutes and he'd say, I'm Morrie, like Tuesdays with Morrie. Yeah. How do you know about that? Literally, that's how well known it is. So it was a surprise to me. It wasn't supposed to be a big book. They only printed 20,000 copies of it. I thought I'd have them in the trunk of my car for the rest of my life and, give them out on holidays. And it took off. People embraced it, and for what I guess the reasons that you were kind enough to just offer. And I'm very happy that people embraced it. But really, it was just written out as a labor of love. And that taught me very early in my literary life that do things for the right reasons. Don't aim your books to be, some kind of, okay, where can I find the bestseller list area that's open? Let me go for that. It's not going to work. Believe me, earlier in my career, before I went to see Morrie, I'm sure I entertained those kinds of thoughts, but I don't anymore. It's just right from the heart, and people will find their way to it. And that's what happened with Tuesdays with Morrie.
What a beautiful story. And also, I love, I've heard you say about it that, you realize when you're doing things for the right reasons and when you're doing things for other people, that's when you don't give up. Had it just been a selfish thing, you would have given up. But you had a real reason to do it, and so you didn't give up. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left here. We have some time for some audience questions. Why don't we throw a couple up on screen?
Yeah, we can go a little longer if you need to go, by the way. I've been doing a lot of talking. I feel a little guilty.
Oh my God, are you kidding? Okay, Christina, thank you for this question. Do you feel like God is encouraging or guiding you to write your books? Do you feel more connected to him through your writing?
Oh, wow. That's a little loftier than I allow myself to think. It's more like at the end when I finish a book, I think more like, did I write anything here that would embarrass, God or the person, the universe that gave me the ability to write it? I try not to, I don't curse in my books, for example. It's not like I don't curse in private life. Trust me. Anyone who knows me, I grew up in Jersey, it's part of your language. But, I didn't curse in Tuesdays with Morrie, and that got read by so many people and so many kids that I became very conscious about the fact that kids were reading my books, and they were reading them in fifth grade. They were writing book reports about Tuesdays with Morrie. So I've kind of shied away from that because I think, well, what if kids are reading it now, and I do the same kind of thing, I guess, with God, not so formally, but like, am I writing anything here that's really kind of goes against the idea or would embarrass, people who believed in God? But no, I can't say that I think that these, other than everything I do comes from a higher power, but I don't think God is directing me to write books specifically. I mean, that would be thinking an awful lot of yourself. And even for someone who wrote a book where he wrote like God in a lifeboat, I don't have that high opinion of myself. No.
All right, let's have another question from the audience. Well, all right, here we go. Teresa, well, I have the new book in hand to read. What is your next idea for a book?
Well, normally when people ask me that the day I publish a new book, I always say, I'm so tired. Please don't ask me that. Like, I can't do another one because I'm not. I mean, it took me 6 years between Tuesdays with Morrie and the Five People You Meet in Heaven, and 3 years for the between books for the most of the rest of them. Now I'm going about every 2 years, and I feel like I'm on a treadmill. And so usually I don't have an answer for that, other than please let me sleep, and I'll tell you in 6 months when I wake up. But this time I actually do, because I don't know if it'll be the next one or the one after that, but I've had an idea for a long time that my publishers would like me to do that concerns, it's something that I went to the Holocaust Museum on a visit to Israel and saw something that stayed with me for so long about how when they were rounding up the Jewish people to put them on trains to take them to concentration camps, in order to get that many people to get into a train, they had to get them to trust that the train was not going to hurt them, or be dangerous. Otherwise, you have mass people running away from the train station. So they got other Jewish people who they threatened to lie and to stand on the train tracks and to lie and say, these trains are going to, you can trust it. These trains are going to safe. Because obviously it was a Nazi official. They wouldn't trust it, but they got Jewish people to do it. And I just thought, like, oh my gosh, what you talk about a moral dilemma, you don't want to lie to your own people, but if you don't, they're going to do something to your family. And I've developed an idea that's kind of based in that. So it'll be a historical kind of novel, but it's got a twist to it, and I've been very anxious to get started on that and see where that takes me.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You've already got me sort of ready to cry here. So, all right,
that'll be somewhat sad, but hopefully something uplifting in it.
One more question from the audience, and then one more from me, and then we'll wrap. Here we go. Audience question: The Stranger in the Lifeboat is a novel. What do you like better, writing fiction or nonfiction, and why?
Like better? It's hard to say if I like it better. I'll tell you the difference, because I've done a lot of both, because my early career was all nonfiction. Now I've written, I think, 7 novels and a lot of screenplays and things like that. So here's the difference, how I would describe it. So when you're doing nonfiction, you write a story about some guy and you say, man, this would be so much more interesting if he had a twin brother. Can you imagine if he had a twin brother? But can't do that because that's not what happened. So you just write what happened. And you imagine what could have been, but can't be because you're stuck with reality. When you do fiction, you say, oh, this would be more interesting if this guy had a twin brother. And then you say, I can give him a twin brother. And so you give him a twin brother. And then a voice in your head says, what about a twin sister? And then the voice says, what about kids? And then a voice says, what about if he lived in Mexico? And you don't get those things out of your head. There's just too many ideas. So the curse of nonfiction is that you can't stretch the truth. And the curse of fiction is that you can't stop stretching the truth. And you have to at some point say, well, I'm just going to go with the brother and that's going to be it. And you have to, in each case, you have to make a choice. In one case, you're more stuck with the choice. In the other case, you have to make it. But they both sort of have their maddening moments. I would say that nonfiction, it feels like more work because you don't want to leave anything out, and you do a lot of research. And I do a lot of research with nonfiction books. Incredible. I'm trained as a journalist. That's kind of what you do. But fiction, I find that, I end up doing a lot of research in my fiction too, maybe more than I need to. If you read the Magic Strings of Frankie Presto, which is one of my favorite books, it's totally different than anything else I've done. It's 500 plus pages. It's my, opus, but it's about music, which is my love, my first love. And every single fact in that book is accurate, except the existence of Frankie Presto, who's this make-believe magical guitar player, was like the best guitar player to ever walk the earth. But everything else in that book, all the bands he plays with, the dates, the times, the names of the studios, where things took place, a party at Mick Jagger's house, which actually took place. I mean, everything was real except him. I didn't have to do that. Nobody would have cared. It's a novel, you know. I mean, the guy has a magic guitar, you know. Come on. But I just felt like, you know, if it reads better if you do the research. And so those two worlds for me, fiction and nonfiction, blend together a lot.
All right, we have a bunch of late coming questions, and Mitch, we're going to wrap up. Let's just do a quick one last question. Jenna just popped something on screen. Do you play music as an escape?
Oh yeah, music is a huge thing in my life, and I play with a band of writers. Some people may have seen us, called the Rock Bottom Remainders. We're terrible. I mean, just not awful. We play songs that have we can't, and the song can't have more than 4 chords, or we don't play it. But we have a few ringers in the band, you know, real drummer, real saxophone players. And, you know, I made my living as a musician for a while, so I can play a little bit. And Dave Barry can play guitar, and Ridley Pearson can play bass. And Amy Tan and Stephen King are in it, and many, Scott Turow and other writers. And some have more talent than others, and some have no talent whatsoever. But we do everything for charity. And so we feel, you know, it's all for literacy groups and everything. We play all over the place. But when I'm not doing that or escaping with that, I have 3, 4, 5 pianos in my house of different sizes or keyboards, and I play all the time. The kids in Haiti, we have a massive music program, I guess mostly because it matters a lot to me. And I play with the kids in Haiti every time I go down. We have a boys band, we have a teenage boys band, a teenage girls band, and a younger kids. The teenage girls is Destiny 7, the teenage the Hermanos Brothers, which is just Spanish for brothers, so brothers. And the younger kids band is called the Unstoppable Tete Chargé, which is Tete Chargé is troublemaker in Creole, so it's like the Unstoppable Troublemakers. And I have such joy just making music with these kids and playing with them, and so it's an absolute escape for me every day. There's not a day goes by that I don't play music or listen to music. It's such a big part of me that I can't play it when I write. I can't even have classical music on when I write, because my mind goes right to, oh, diminished fifth, you know, oh, the minor seventh, oh, what, you know, I see what they did there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be writing. This is a waste. So I have to shut it off. So yeah, music is a huge part of my life.
Wow. All right. Well, Mitch, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a wonderful interview. Such a treat for me, folks. The book is called The Stranger in the Lifeboat. I've been watching the comments come through, Mitch, and everybody's saying, I'm going to buy this. I already have it. So I think you're well on your way here. One last question from me before we wrap, which is this. You know, you came to Morrie 25 years ago in the 90s, however long ago that was, and you were a hard-charging guy, having a lot of worldly success. You'd already done so much in your career by that point. But there was a sort of emptiness at the center that Morrie picked up on right away. And that book is about kind of the way that he told you about ways to live that you'd maybe been missing in your life till then. And I guess my last question to you is, if Morrie could come back now and see the man you've become today and what you've done since that time, what do you think he'd say?
I hope he would say, well done. I hope he would say, I got you to turn around, didn't I? You know, I hope he would say, I got you to cry, didn't I? He was always trying to get me to cry. I don't know, it's kind of a personal victory. You know, I said, well, what's it going to mean to you if I start crying? Are you going to like go, you know? You know, I like to think that he would be proud of me. I hope, you know, because I think that there's a bit of Morrie in every single one of my books. And I say that openly, you know, some lesson or another that I learned from those Tuesdays sitting alongside him finds its way into every book. And certainly that's the case in The Stranger in the Lifeboat. And I think when, you know, I was very sad when Morrie died. And I was very sad, obviously, when Chica died. I looked at like my experience with Morrie and Chica as like bookends of a life. When I was 37, I was the young person sitting with an older person as he was dying, listening to the wisdom that came out of his mouth. And then when I was 57, basically, and older, I was sitting next to a little child and listening to, as she died, and listening to the wisdom that came out of her mouth. And I was very upset when both of them died. But there's a moment in Stranger in the Lifeboat where you can kind of see how I've come to think about all that, where Benji is asking the God character, why did you have to take my wife? She died, and he's crying over it. And the God character says, well, I know that you cry when you lose your loved ones on earth. I see it. I know you cry, but trust me, the ones who have died are not crying. And, if you believe that there's something after this life, whatever it is, then you believe that they're not crying. And as sad as it is for you, maybe it's not sad for them. And maybe, since in both cases they were suffering terribly from diseases, that the fact that they're not crying counters the tears that you have here on earth. And I've come to believe that with Morrie and with Chica. And I hope that one day your question becomes a reality for me. Not because they come back here, although that would be really nice, but more likely because I go there. And that would be my bigger wish, is that I get to see them again. And I hope deep down that I do.
What a way to end. Mitch, thank you so much for coming on. It's funny. Morrie says that he wants to make you cry, but your true destiny in life clearly is to make everybody else cry.
I promise you that's not my intent.
People, please buy this wonderful, wonderful gem of a book. Mitch, it's been such an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for making time in this busy day.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate talking with you.
Great. Folks, we'll see you soon back on The Thoughtful Bro. Thanks for tuning in.